Hello YouTube world, this is Uncle Fester with Shade Tree Survivalists. Decided to try to do the second episode of the series that I've been trying to work on as far as just kind of sharing some advice, biblical advice I believe on improving our lives and our spiritual situation, and just trying to make ourselves better and have a closer walk with God. I've kind of alluded before just a little bit in the first video that I'm going through a very trying time in my life right now, and it involves my family, and that's probably about as much as I want to say about it. Y'all could probably figure out the read between the lines and everything else. One of the series that I wanted to get started was sharing some things that I learned from this book right here. Focus. It's called The Love Dare, and it's by I want to say Kendricks. There are two of them. I think it's Alex and Alex and Stephen Kendricks, I think, who's the one's the author of this. And they don't have it down there. Hang on a minute. Stephen and Alex Kendricks. If you're having trouble within your marriage or with relationships and such, this right here is a very good source to go out and read and implement, and it's got a lot of good stuff in there regardless of where you're at in your relationships. I think that where the first chapter really begins at, and it's like I say, I'm not going to go verbatim with it because there's copyrights, and I don't want to take away from their money. Let's just put it to you like that. They have a creation, they've got bills to pay. But I also, at the same time, I'd like to share some of the things that let's just say my take on some of the things that they principles that they taught, and just my way of passing it along without spoiling the book for those of you who want to buy it or check it out from the library or whatever. In the first chapter, one of the things that is kind of the beginning point is that you have to have a cornerstone. I believe the cornerstone of every relationship, whether it be with you and God, or with you and your wife, or you and your children, or you and your family, or you and your friends, or the people that you work with, as a Christian, as somebody that believes in Christ and somebody tries to follow the principles of the Bible, I believe the basis for everything is love. In the Bible, Jesus was asked, what's the greatest two commandments? And Jesus said, you know them well, there's only two. He says everything else hinges on these two verses, on these two commandments, and that is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy mind and all thy soul, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. Everything else hinges on those two things. If you love God, how do you show that you love God? There's another verse in the Bible that says that if you can't love your brother who you can see, how are you going to love God who you can't see? We learn how to love God through the relationships that we have and build with each other. If we have problems and with the interactions that we have with our fellow human beings, then our interactions with God's not going to fare any better than that. I think one of the things that in the first chapter, I think the first thing that the Kendricks, the point that they made was that the two pillars or the two cornerstones that hold up love that you have to begin to build if you're going to build a foundation for love is patience and kindness. I don't have a problem with the word patience, but I think patience is a good word. I think that's a correct interpretation. But I'm a King James fella. I like the original King James version of the Bible, And in the original King James Version of the Bible, one of the things that is the word that is used, I think, sometimes instead of patience is long-suffering. The definition of long-suffering that I looked up in my Webster's New World Dictionary from probably about 1960, that I have kept in the family for, it's been in the family for a while, is bearing trouble, pain, etc. patiently for a long time. And I think that's probably the best definition for patience that there is just long-suffering. I'll probably use those two terms interchangeably. But it's being able to sit down and bear wrongdoing, I think. The other pillar that they speak of, which is kindness. Kindness, I think the definition that I looked up was, is always ready to help others and do good, friendly, generous, and do good. Always ready to help others and do good. And then as synonyms they've got down here, friendly, gentle, generous, sympathetic. To showing the second definition was showing goodness, generosity, and sympathy. And I think that's a pretty solid definition of kindness. I'm not going to be dealing with kindness so much in this particular one because in the first chapter they deal mostly with patience. So I'm going to try to follow along with that. I think as we go along with beginning to understand love in our language, we use the word love for all situations. I mean, you can love a hot dog, you can love cats, and then you turn around and say, well, I love my wife. And at the same time, you can sit down and say, I made love to my wife. Or you can sit down and say, I love him, that's my buddy. So, I mean, it's an interchangeable word. I mean, it really has so many definitions and so many levels, and there's no way to really differentiate. We can say, well, I love him. And it might be the same thing. I mean, it might, how deep is that love? What kind of love are you talking about? The Greeks had 6 levels, 6 different words for love, and each one was sort of like a different level of love. I think the first word was Eros. If I mispronounce that, you have to forgive my South Georgia linguistics. But Eros was a sexual, passionate kind of love. It was a loss of control, sexual control. It's kind of like, you see that one person and it's like you get all hot and bothered by them and you can't control yourself anymore. It's a loss of control. It's I think maybe what we would call being in lust, I think would be the English equivalent of what Eros represents as far as that level of love. The next word is Philia, which is deep friendship. When I think of Philia and somebody saying deep friendship, that's a friendship that's built over time. That's somebody that you have built trust with. That's somebody. It's kind of like the friendship that I have with my buddy Mac Daddy. That's somebody that if I was to go in, if somebody said, okay, Joe, you're going to go into battle tomorrow, he's on my short list of people that I would call up and say, hey, bring your guns, we're going to do this. That's because we've been friends ever since I was 3 and he was 4. I mean, I was 4 and he was 3. So we know each other. We have a very deep friendship with each other. I think the next level of it would be ludus. And ludus is a playful love. It's the kind of love that children have for each other. When your kid comes home and says, I love such and such at school, I'm going to marry him when I grow up. It's not so much a shallow love, it's an inexperienced kind of love. It's kind of like a love between two, teenagers when they first fall in love with each other, and, they feel like they, kind of the Romeo and Juliet kind of love, you know what I'm saying? They haven't been together that long, they don't have that real deep-rooted kind of love, but it's kind of that playful love. It's kind of that shallow, feeling out stage, I guess. The next level, the 4th level, would be pragma love. And pragma is long-standing love. That is an old, when you see the 80-year-old couple that's been married for 45, 50 years, and it's like they can finish each other's sentences and they still walk hand in hand, that's a long-standing love. That's what we think of as true love. What we think of as that kind of love that has stood the test of time, and that those two people have overcome all of the obstacles that comes with being together that long, and they're knitted together into that one person. That's a very special kind of love. That's the kind of love that we in our society don't really understand or practice that much anymore. I think the next is Philia. Okay, I can't pronounce that one. Okay, not my bad. It's spelled Philautia, and I'm not going to even attempt to try to pronounce that one. I ain't going to butcher that one. But it's love of self. And that particular type of love has two levels. There's the one that is a selfish kind of love, where it's narcissistic and it's all about me and it's about what I want and it's about my rights and it's about how I feel and how this is going to affect me and what's in it for me kind of a love. Versus a self-love where you take care of yourself. You take, you sit down and you have a love for yourself in such a way that it's not so much a selfish kind of love as much as a taking care of yourself. It's like, I'm not going to do this to hurt myself anymore. I'm going to sit down and take care of me. Not necessarily a bad kind of love. There's times where you have to sit down and say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to put myself in this particular situation anymore because that's hurting me and I'm not getting anything out of it and the other person's not getting anything out of it. So that's kind of the level of that kind of love. That's the second level of that. And I think the last kind of love is the love that we as Christians are trying to shoot for. And it's something that I think everybody hears about. It's agape love. And I think the best definition that I have of agape love is unconditional love. It's a love that you give to a person regardless. As Christians, we seek to have that kind of unconditional love for everyone in our life. We have that unconditional love for everyone and that's what we seek, because God had that unconditional love for us. Even when we were enemies of God, even when we hated God, even when we set out to be against Him and set our mind and our actions against Him and our words against Him, He still loved us. He loved us enough that He died on a cross for us, that He gave His life so that we could have salvation, that our sins could be atoned, and that we could be redeemed and made sons and daughters of His. That's that's grace. That's an unconditional love that He had for us. I think the Bible says, I love God because He loved me first. And I'm able to love others because God loved me first. And I think that's a starting point that we should all consider and understand as we embark upon what we're trying to do. I hope to come back to those 6 points, those 6 kinds of love later on in a later video. But right now, I've covered those. I'm just trying to give you an idea of the different kinds of love out there, and the love that I'm discussing from in this series of videos that I'm trying to make is an unconditional kind of love. I believe that long suffering is the first cornerstone of love, and that is putting others' needs, wants, and desires ahead of our own. That's not to say that you shouldn't take care of yourself. That's not to say that if you're in an abusive relationship and your husband's coming home drunk every night and beating the snot out of you, that hey, I'm going to have this unconditional love for him. You can have that unconditional love for him, but you can also do that from a distance. You don't have to sit there and be somebody's punching bag every night. That's not what I'm putting forth or saying when I say unconditional love. There has to be a little bit of that self-love in those kinds of situations where you have to say, okay, I love him, but I'm not going to sit there and put myself in a situation where I'm going to be physically harmed, or my children are going to be physically harmed, or someone in my family is going to be physically harmed. You have to sit down and draw a line somewhere that says, okay, I love this person, but, and, maybe technically that's not unconditional love. I feel like in those kinds of situations you have to sit down and let God lead you on what you should do and what you shouldn't do in those kind of situations. In long suffering, you're bearing sometimes you have to bear the other person's ill will towards you. Sometimes you have to deal with mistreatment. Sometimes you have to deal with their mistakes with a kind spirit, and to do that willingly. There's a verse in James that says, be slow to speak, quick to hear, and slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Sometimes we have to choose to react positively to negative situations. Long suffering, I think, is coming to a point where you make a choice to control your emotions and not let your emotions take control of you. Generally, a person that is not long suffering, generally a person that is not patient, their default emotion is usually anger. I know that for myself in this particular situation, that's how it is with me. Is that when I feel like I suffer an injustice, or I feel like somebody does something to me that's not right, or is something against me, my first reaction is to become angry and to act out on that anger. And that's not to say that I just walk up and hit somebody in the mouth, or I'll throat punch somebody or whatever, but sarcasm, speech, reacting in an angry way with your voice and using words. Words cut a lot deeper and a lot worse than what fists ever do. My mother could be physically abusive when I was younger, and I carry a few scars from that, but those scars healed up. Those don't bother me. Sometimes it's the verbal things that was said to me growing up that carry a much deeper scar that still affects me negatively even as a grown man of 45. Anger is something that flows from our own ignorance, our own foolishness, and mostly our own selfishness. When we become angry, we become much like one of the sons of Cain, which sat down and said, I will avenge myself sevenfold on anybody that does me wrong. It's basically that human nature of, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back harder. And then it just escalates from there. In Proverbs 14:29, there's a verse that says, he who is slow to anger shows great judgment, but he who is easily angered shows folly. Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but a man who is slow to anger calms the dispute. We have to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers, peacemakers. We have to make peace. And most of the time in making peace, we have to set aside our hurt. We have to set aside, because that's where most of the anger comes from. Somebody has hurt our feelings. Somebody has hurt us. Somebody has wounded our pride, or they've wounded our what we thought about something, or they've made us feel worthless. And in feeling that way, we have to prove that we are worth something. If we feel like our rights as a human being has been violated, and that we have to sit down and avenge those rights. Sometimes as a Christian, most times as a Christian, we should always be the first one to apologize, whether we feel like we're wrong or right. I think first off, we have to give each other the permission to be wrong. Some people, you have to meet them where they're at. If you sit around and wait till they've gotten themselves right, or they've apologized to you, or they have, righted whatever wrong that you feel has been done to you, you might be waiting forever on that. I've seen brothers not talk to each other for years, simply over something that was as simple as maybe a misspoke word, or a misspoke deed. I can remember a time where I didn't speak to my father for a very, very, very long time, simply because he sold a car out from under me that I had told him, give me a little time, I'll come back and I will buy this car from you. And he sold it, and he sold it to someone else for a lot less than what I was willing to pay him for if he would have just waited. And he felt justified in what he did, and I felt justified in the fact that I felt like I had been slighted, and it caused a rift for a very, very, very long time between me and my father like that, because I reacted in anger, because I sat down and I said, he violated my rights. He hurt me, so this is how I'm going to hurt him back. Not proud of that, but that's, if you learn from your mistakes, giving people the ability to make those mistakes. Let me ask you a question, and it's a simple question. When somebody violates your rights, or somebody hurts you, or somebody does something to you that upsets you, how you treat that person. If you were to make that same mistake, how would you feel if somebody treated you the same way that you treated that person? That's a question that you really need to ask yourself. If you wouldn't appreciate or like to be treated the same way that someone has treated you when you've made a mistake, I'm a very forgetful person. I remember one time I locked my keys up in my truck while the truck was running. Yeah, I did that. I do a lot of, if there's one thing that's caused a lot of trouble within my family, if there's I'm not an adulterer. I don't hit my wife or my kids. I'm not an abusive type of person as far as physically is concerned. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't gamble. I don't mess around. But one of the things that there is about me that really, I think, has caused a lot of trouble and strife within my family life and my relationships in general, whether it be family, work, or friends, is that I'm an irresponsible person. Sometimes I don't think before I act, and because of that, I do silly things like lock my keys up in the truck while it's running, or forget to lock the car in a bad neighborhood, or miscommunicate and not show up somewhere on time, or be there on time to do something that I knew I was supposed to be doing, or oversleep, and it's those little things that build up. But you have to sit down and ask yourself, okay, when you make those mistakes, when somebody else makes those mistakes, and you, boom, you hit them, you get at them, you let them have it both barrels, you tell them, well, you're stupid, you ought to know better than to do this. Why can't you sit down and remember to do these kind of things? Why can't Is that how you would want to be treated if you were to have made the same mistake? And most of the time, the golden rule in the Bible is to treat others the way you want to be treated. Do unto others as you'd have them to do unto you. If all of us would do that, the world would be a lot better place. If we just simply did that, we are always going to sit down and justify why we do what we do. It's a lot like, when I did that, I was tired. When I did that right there was different circumstances than what, when they did it. We're always going to argue those kind of points. And the point is that when you control your anger and you take a moment to breathe and control, and instead of reacting negatively to a negative situation, and you react positively to that reaction, you say, well, I had a guy cut me off today. I've made a long trip back from Savannah today, and there was a guy that just whipped around me and dang near took off my bumper. And I for a minute there I was wanting to I don't have much road rage, but I got pretty bent about it to start with, and I sat down and I was like, well, look at this idiot. And then I immediately stopped myself because I felt the pinch of the Holy Spirit on me saying, And I said, forgive me for that, Lord. I said, I don't know where that guy's going or what that guy's got on his mind or where his head's at. So, maybe he's going through something I don't know. Maybe he's just a jerk. But at the same time, I don't know him. I can give him the benefit of the doubt in the fact that, maybe he didn't mean it the way it came out. It's in the little things like that. One of the things that I want to make clear about something, and it's experience, something from somebody that's been down the road. When you ask God for something, no matter what it is, God does not simply, if I ask God for, and so let's say in this instance, give me the ability to be long-suffering, give me patience, let me have patience. That's a loaded prayer, and I'll tell you why. God doesn't just go bingo, bango, bongo, you got patience. That's not how it works. What God does is He gives you the situations to show patience, to choose patience. If you ask God for long suffering, He's going to give you situations where you have to choose to be patient. If you want to say down and say, I want to be a more loving person, He's going to give you situations where you have to be loving. If you want to be able to have unconditional love, He's going to put you in situations where unconditional love is required and you have to choose it. He doesn't just snap His fingers and you've got it. You have to go through an experience where you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to choose to be this instead of that. If you say, Lord, give me control of my anger, all right? He's going to put you in situations where you're going to be angry and you're going to have to choose to control that anger. That's just something that you have to understand, that when you begin to try to change something in your life, you say, what is it that I sit here and I'm trying to do all this right here, and it's like all this bad stuff's happened. It's happening because God is trying to give you the opportunity to exercise that which you've asked for. If you've asked for patience, He's going to put you in situations where patience is required and that you have to choose to have it. If He's going to put you in situations where you got to be patient and kind, then not only do you have to be patient, then you have to show kindness while you're having that patience. If you want to be long-suffering, He's going to put you in a situation where you have to suffer long and do it with kindness. So keep that in mind when you begin to sit down and ask God for something, especially when it comes down to different things of this nature. Being patient and long-suffering means having to set aside your rights. You see, Jesus had the right to come down here and to sit on the throne over all of us and judge all of us and sit down and you know, throw lightning bolts if he wanted to, because he was perfect and we weren't. He chose to set aside his rights as a king and give reconciliation instead. I think when we have to choose between our rights and reconciliation, we should always choose reconciliation. In Matthew, Jesus, when he was giving the Sermon on the Mount, said, you know, look, if you're going to go give your offering and you remember that you and your brother have a problem with each other. And later on, there's another verse, another scripture that if you have the problem with that person, or that person has the problem with you, it doesn't matter. As a Christian, you should always be the first one to go to that person and seek reconciliation. This is a hallmark of somebody that follows true Christianity, is that you're seeking reconciliation. You take your rights and your self-justification and you set it over here and you say, you know what, I'm going to set that aside because I want my relationship with this other person to be right. Because, you know, one of the fundamentals of the Lord's Prayer was, Lord, let me forgive those that trespass against me, even as you have forgiven me of my trespasses. If you don't forgive men their trespasses against you, neither will the Lord forgive your trespasses. You see, our forgiveness rests on our shoulders, in that we have to be